and welcome to the front page from the Racing Post. Over the next 30 minutes, we're going to be covering all the latest news from the racing world over the past 7 days, including Savethelastdance's Great Escape Act at the Curragh, news of a declining fall in the number of trainers in Britain, the return of the Racing League, the King George at Ascot, and the latest on gambling regulation. For all of that, I'm your host, Tom Kerr, and I'm delighted to be joined by Cook and Maddy Playle. Welcome both.
Hi.
We're going to start with that news of the number of trainers in Britain. Now, this was a story on the front page of the Racing Post last week. Numbers provided by the National Trainers Federation revealing that the total number of trainers in Britain had declined by over 100 over the last decade and now stood at 553. Arguably more concerning is the fact that the total number of trainers accounting for 50% of all runners had fallen from 95 to just 80. That's 80 trainers responsible for 50% of all runners in Britain. Maddy, tell us more about this story and what lies behind this trend of consolidation with the bigger yards.
Okay, Tom, I think there's an awful lot to unwrap here. Essentially, let's talk about that 17% fall in just 10 years. Now, this is something we're seeing and we're talking a lot more about over jumps with Willie Mullins' domination, but also on the flat as well. We've seen a fantastic trainer in Oliver Sherwood recently bow out. I think there's multiple things at play. Firstly, the training landscape's changed. You know, things aren't the same as they were 10, 20 years ago, and naturally when groups of people have success, you're drawn to that and people want to invest in people they see to be doing particularly well. I know an aspect that you're keen to talk about is the sort of technological advances, the sort of negating the geographical side of training. You know, back in the day you'd want to be located somewhere near the horse that you were owning so that you could go and see it work, whereas these days that doesn't really happen. And then just the small matter of the COVID-19 pandemic to really kick people while they were down in terms of smaller trainers. Then also you've got the rising costs associated and just in general more pressure on staff. So I think the challenges that trainers are facing, they're going to be felt more naturally by the smaller trainers. And we've spoken on this show before about what we think should be done about it. I spoke to numerous people in the paper. This story came out on Friday, and then there was a reaction piece on Saturday where some trainers were asked for their views, and the likes of Rod Millman saying, well, I think the sport's going to be very boring. Of course, we can't forget about the betting implication, the competitiveness of racing if there's such dominance in so few hands. So I think this is a real meaty, challenging story to get into, because obviously we want our sport to be viable, to be healthy, and to be thriving. And when you have power in so few hands, that's going to be a challenge. And it's not nice to see so many capable, brilliant trainers out of business. So what are we going to do about it? That's the big question. And I think the first thing for me is talk about it more. You know, canvass opinions. Let's get some more data. Let's get some more statistics. We've touched upon that last week, but let's delve into it more deeply and see what can be done about it.
Well, I think diagnosing why this decline has happened is a very important part of it. I was struck by Roger Varian interviewed in Sunday's newspaper talking about when King of Steel hit the front in the Derby 2 furlongs out, and he was thinking this might pay a few bills. You know, and that's Roger Varian, one of the top trainers in the country, 200 odd horses in Newmarket, a very, very big operation. And he was sort of talking about, you know, it's a cash flow business. They're constantly sort of in arrears, and they're constantly looking, you know, how are we going to make the next payroll, the next supplier payment. If someone at the top end is in that situation, then you can obviously see how the economics of being a much smaller operation are going to be extremely challenging. But of course, it's therefore something which is affecting the entire sport, and just how marginal training is these days is obviously a threat, not just to small trainers, but indeed to all trainers.
It feels like it's not really a very attractive profession for people to come into. You'd have to absolutely love the game and be determined to try and make your way in it. in order to approach it, at least judging by what's out there these days about the experience of being a trainer. You know, the people who talk about it make it sound, for the most part, tremendously unattractive, and you know, financially there's sort of no future in it whatsoever. I mean, somebody must be making money somewhere, but the idea that Roger Varian is sort of somewhere near the breadline, you know, that's a serious eye-opener.
It's tough. It's a tough gig. I was just thinking about this morning as I was coming in. I was thinking, if you're a trainer, you are simultaneously basically a small business owner. You're a sort of head of customer relations. You're head of marketing. You're media relations. Now, the larger you get, the more all-encompassing that is. It's a really difficult job. So let's talk about one of those things, because this is potentially one of the reasons why we're seeing smaller trainers struggling. The sort of marketing and media relations.
Yeah.
Now, Dan Abram, the head of the Syndicates Association, said that it was a problem with the way the sport was marketed. We also had another syndicate manager saying the brutal truth is it's easier to sell shares in horses when they're going to big trainers. Is that a problem, or is that just a natural consequence that people who are looking to get into the sport want to be with the people who they think are the best?
Yeah, I think that's the natural progression of it, isn't it? Success attracts success, and if you see someone doing well, you want to be a part of that. And particularly when you're talking about powerful owners, you know, Middle Eastern owners, we've seen it recently with Watnan Racing, they have that power that they can just purchase these huge horses and almost immediately take up a position in the market, and they can afford to demand what they like, essentially, because that's the position they're in. I think it's true that naturally, you know, bigger trainers who are having more success, they're going to get more TV coverage, which is they're going to result in, you know, appealing to more owners, etc., etc. And you talk about the range of roles that a trainer has to do. I mean, again, I come back to, it's a different landscape now. You know, it's hard to believe only a couple of years ago we didn't have dual licenses. And if you go into one of the big yards, you'll see how the roles are designated between a whole team effort. And smaller trainers, they can't compete with that.
I think, to be honest, you don't need to explain the current situation where owners are just gravitating towards the big names. What needs explaining is why it ever used to be different. I mean, that's so completely naturally, so obviously the way that things would happen. I guess if you go back like 40 years, you know, you sell your engineering firm for a few million and you start buying racehorses, you probably support the local guy, don't you? That's how it always used to be. You know, owners in a certain area would support whoever happened to be training near them, and they would strike up a relationship and they'd wander down and see the horses whenever they felt like it. And we're just in a different game now. You know, and especially with the rise of syndicates, they're keenly aware that, you know, the people who are buying shares want to get to the big races. And it's, say if you're in jump racing, you know, you want to get to Cheltenham, and a lot of these syndicates, even if they're sort of largely dealing with British-based people, they're sending their horses to Ireland because they think, you know, Willie, Gordon, Henry, Gavin, those are the guys who are going to get our horses to some handicap at the Cheltenham Festival with half a chance of, you know, well, at least being a 14-to-1 shot and taken into consideration, sort of thing.
Well, let's talk about the consequences for this, because it's clearly a trend that's happening. I think it's very likely it's going to continue to progress in the same direction over the coming years. So the consequences for this, I suppose, well, first of all, let's look on the bright side, which is, I guess, it's making it slightly easier to get people into the sport because you're selling this aspirational vision of having your horse with the best. But clearly there's a lot of downsides, most obviously what it means for competition, because while these big yards are quite good at running their horses against each other, they only really do that once they've covered everything they possibly can cover. And then consequences for betting as well, because that has a direct impact on the attractiveness of races. We accept then that this is probably in the round a negative development. But what can be done about it?
Well, one of your ideas, Chris, is just cap
One of your crazy ideas.
No, not at all. But and it's been widely discussed as well. Is capping the number of horses a yard can have?
Yeah. So that is the number one thing that jumps out at me that you could do. The basic problem is that, we've never even approached this idea of setting parameters for what a trainer's yard can be. We've just
like other sports have as well.
Completely laissez-faire. I mean, you think about other sports where you've got teams, you've got a league structure, certain number of teams in the league, each team has maximum number of players on the roster, there might even be a salary cap, stuff like that. It's controlled, in the idea of producing some sort of level playing field. And we've never even looked at that subject, and that's why I think it's so hard to get officials focused on it now, because it's never been done that way. And they just sort of, I think even now they'll do their absolute best to wriggle their way out of accepting any need to do something, because they've already got plenty of problems to deal with, and they don't want to be irritating the most successful people in their sport by saying, well, you're too successful now and we're going to have to clamp down on you.
Potentially irritating owners as well, to be fair, because if you're an owner looking to get into the sport and you think, well, I want to have my horse trained by Willie Mullins, and they say, well, no, sorry, I'm afraid Willie Mullins has reached his cap, then it's potentially going to deter you, and you think, well, sod that for a game of soldiers, I'll go and use my hard-earned somewhere else. I suppose
it might already be quite difficult to get into some of those big name yards.
Indeed.
You probably need somebody to sort of give you a good introduction and to have a significant sum to spend. I suspect it, especially when you're talking about the big name flat yards. They're just not going to look at you unless you're buying a horse with a reasonable, in a price bracket where it's got a reasonable chance of becoming a group winner.
I wonder if it's less about thinking about how we can restrict the top yards and more about thinking about how we can incentivise the smaller yards.
Are they not incentivised enough? I mean,
well, perhaps there's, I thought there was a good idea by the trainer Sarah Humphrey, who talked about different championships for different tiers of trainers. If you have an average of 50 or under horses, then you have your different table to the overarching trainers competition. Now, I thought that's quite nice because it helps highlight where yards that simply are not operating at the same size can be highlighted as very successful within their own cohort. Now, obviously there's some operational challenges there, but measuring that and everything, but it's a nice idea because incentivizing or supporting those smaller yards, up-and-coming yards, I think is very important, because ultimately you're going to have to go out there, if we don't impose some sort of rules, we're going to have to go out there and make these other yards more attractive to prospective owners, big and small, if we want them to, be able to compete, basically, and to have any future.
I think that's where I'd be sitting on it for now, it's, as you've touched upon, Chris, it's such a big, complex issue. I don't think we're anywhere near to regulators putting a cap on, number of horses or, spending money or any other, big concepts like that. But I do think there are probably more things we can do to support our smaller trainers, more proportional help, targeted help, and just reward them, because at the end of the day we know that smaller trainers can do the job when they're given the ammunition.
Well, we will, I'm sure, return to this story in the months to come. If you wanted to read about that first, you'd have had to be a member of Racing Post Members Club Ultimate, which you can sign up to at a special price. Details coming up in a second. Welcome back. The best of last week's action came from the Curragh, where Savethelastdance was bidding to go one better than her Epsom second in the Irish Oaks. Now, for most of the race, it looked exceedingly unlikely that was going to happen. She hit 999 to 1 on the exchange for €14, and it looked like she was going to paddle home in mid-division. But then suddenly she grew wings and she flew home under Ryan Moore to take victory. A boost for the Oaks form, Chris?
Kind of much needed, wasn't it? I think Savethelastdance is the first winner to come out of the Oaks. Soul Sister was set a pretty difficult task in France in the Grand Prix de Paris. He ran okay to be third.
I found that quite an odd decision to go for that race.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well,
I did.
Phone John Gosden and tell him.
I'm sure that'd go down really well.
I think he just had other horses for other races, and so she ended up going there.
Links to the dominance of trainers. Anyway, sorry.
She ran well, but she started fab, didn't she? And we were all sort of expecting just a bit better. So in that context, third was kind of disappointing. And the other horses behind have not really set Heather on fire. So you sort of felt like, for the sake of the Oaks' reputation, this year's Oaks, Savethelastdance needed to do something good. And she was toiling, wasn't she, at the turn for home? She was obviously beaten. And then the Aga Khan's horse sort of loomed up on her outside, and that seemed to intimidate her, and she was sort of shrinking a little bit with that one there. I think it was Azazat, I can't quite remember. Yeah. I think her tiring was key to the result, because if she'd still been there on the shoulder of Savethelastdance, you might not have seen that sort of last forward move that proved decisive. Yeah. But I feel so sorry for Blue Stocking, because the move that she made is going to win
like a race winner.
Almost every Curragh Classic you've ever seen.
But Savethelastdance and Soft Ground are a formidable combination. And Ryan Moore as well. Aidan O'Brien was positively gushing in his praise afterwards. Another masterclass from Ryan, do we think?
I've seen better rides from him this season.
Oh.
No.
No one escaping the Playle fire today.
No, I think it was a good ride. I just think that the filly is a very strong stayer, and her stamina came into play.
Yeah.
And he couldn't really have done anything other than push her out, could he?
I think that's fair, but it's rare to say that.
It is fair to say, it was a great ride because it was a winning ride, I suppose, wasn't it? As so often is the case in these things.
I think, if anything, to me it was a brilliant ride because he knows her from Chester, and he knows that she's green and still inexperienced, still looking around.
Babyish, he said, didn't he?
Babyish, yeah. And I think, to me, that is part of the brilliance of the ride, and the
it's too late for that. He's not your friend anymore. You just said that your grand could have won it.
I did not. I just think that the horse deserves plenty of credit. I thought it was a really interesting performance, and I think she could be a cup horse next year. The lads are wanting to keep her in training, I think, as they have done with some of their 3-year-olds, and particularly as with fillies, it's an attractive option these days. I really like her. I do.
Where do we think she should go next? Are they going to plot a course to Doncaster, or roll the big dice and possibly look at Paris? Not unknown to be very soft.
Could do both. Could you?
You can do both, yeah.
Yeah. I must admit, when she crossed the line, the first thing you thought was Doncaster, wasn't it? And a 1.6 miles. You think it would suit her down to the ground.
Because she's hit that flat spot that went on for about half a mile, didn't she? And,
now who's being harsh?
Doncaster, that'll matter less. But I think it's all ground with her, isn't it? I mean, if it's good, or even on the fast side of good at Doncaster, you wouldn't be backing her.
People saying, I don't think she's quick enough for an arc. I mean, have you seen what it's taken to win an arc in the last couple of years?
When it's bottomless there, you could see her
definitely
toiling along, but then coming with a wet sail.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility. I have to be honest. And at the prices, the relative prices, I almost think I'd rather punt on it being bottomless in Paris than it being bottomless at Doncaster.
You sort of nearly think that she should be in the King George, because apparently it's going to rain.
Yeah.
At Ascot. I mean, it's a lot to ask, isn't it? Obviously, it's too late for that now. But if she was in that race,
as well in the Arc, don't we?
What price would she be in the King George? She'd be in the Wrecking, I think, couldn't she?
Well, that is the beautiful segue because we have to look ahead to the King George, because obviously the weather is potentially going to completely change the complexion of the race, with Hookham really coming in for lots of support. But what a race we have in store. King of Steel and Auguste Rodin duking it out at the head of market, but a whole host of talent in there. Maddy, what are we thinking about how it's going to unfold?
It's making me dizzy almost, isn't it? Because you've got this big move for Hookham. We've run a lot of stories on the race, and rightly so in recent days, because it looks a real cracker. You've got loads of different elements to this. The 2 star 3-year-olds, the questions over the ground. I just come back to the love of my life in Pile Driver. I just love this horse so much. He just brings so much joy to the racecourse whenever you see him. You know, he's got that character, he's got the quirks, his connections are brilliantly enthusiastic. And William Muir saying, you know, I think he can improve 10 pounds, I think he said, from his Hardwick win. Last year's winner, I just think he gets underestimated.
Oh, he definitely,
every time
definitely
he runs.
does get underestimated.
Yeah.
That is.
So I will bang the door down for Pile Driver.
Excellent. Chris?
Yeah, I'd love to see that. I wanted to back Hookham, but he's already, you know, people are so shrewd these days, that's the problem. The price is kind of gone. But I mean, you'd be happy for the connections, wouldn't you? You know, again,
well, I think people are sort of like assuming that the current conditions are going to be in play at the weekend. I mean, we've obviously had a lot of rain and there's now soft on the ground, but this time of year, doesn't take a lot of time for that to come out of it. If you don't then get the rain
that
later
would be
this
true,
week.
but I don't think the temperatures are due to go up any, are they? We're not going to get drying conditions
23 degrees.
Oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's come to something, hasn't it, when 23 degrees is hot for an English summer.
I'm going to pose the question, who comes out on top in the private battle between August Rodin and King of Steel, Chris?
Oh God! I mean, August Rodin probably. I keep getting him wrong. So no, you should back the other horse. But you know, he's an authentic champ type horse, isn't he? I don't see why King of Steel turns that round.
Okay, do you agree?
I'm going to put myself in the Pile Driver camp as well. Yeah.
It's heart overhead a little, but
yeah, and I don't know. I have some obscure reason I feel it's like grievance towards August Rodin. I can't quite explain it. We'll come on to the People's Champion later, and that's not my People's Champion. Okay, it should be an absolute cracker, but if I was going to be very unkind, the phrase I'd use now is from the sublime to the ridiculous, because you also have another big racing event coming up this week.
Oh dear, I've just seen what you're doing. Poor old Racing League.
It's the Racing League. It's the Racing League, which returns on Thursday. Now, that is very unkind. Very unkind. I honestly, you know, I think it's good to try new things, and it's good that they've put money into doing something a bit different. It's on ITV, which is fantastic. However, the attendance numbers highlighted by Lee Mottershead in his column today are beyond embarrassing. Let's be honest, because he looked at it. He said in year one, the total attendance across the 6 fixtures was 12,000. In last year, it was just 7,935, including 840 people at the finale. Chris, you look shocked.
I mean, it's just cover your eyes awful, isn't it? Those kind of numbers. You hope to get better than that for the most ordinary days racing.
Exactly.
I mean, it wasn't that long ago, or the average fixture was getting 4,000, something like that. So yeah, I mean, the wheels have come off really badly for them to be getting those kind of numbers. There were some excuses, and Lee did draw attention to that, but it's got to do better as a concept. Like you, I think, you know, the sport generally is just a bit set in its ways, and it's healthy, it's positive to try and come up with new ideas. Not everyone warmed to this one because they used some buzzwords from the outset that alienated a few people, you know, the older generation, which is basically everyone who's into horse racing. They started talking about how it was going to be apart from you, but let me tell you, you'll get there soon enough, in my experience. They were talking about how this was going to be a brand playground and stuff like that. Do you remember that, and all the sort of very brash claims about how they were going to
swish cocktails and the rest?
Yeah, bring in huge numbers of new. It was the new audience that we were promised, and that, you know, they haven't even kept the old audience.
No.
So they've got ground to make up. The Shergar Cup's the one I always come back to, because, you know, people hate that. Even people who've loved racing all their lives, and they keep going, oh, racing's not a team sport, and this is artificial, and you shouldn't be doing it. But when you go to Ascot on that day, you know, there's like 28,000 people. It's the sort of crowd that they'll never get there for the King George, outside of Royal Ascot.
And it's a blast. It's a great day.
It's really good fun.
They have entertainment everywhere. They get loads of families in. There's music on. It's just a party. It's great fun.
Yes.
And that's what Racing League should be as well. The thing I thought they always should have done, free entry. Free entry, because let's be honest, you're not making anything off 840 people that you wouldn't make off 8,000 people buying food and drink. And then, rather than it being like a morgue, and, you know, frankly, deeply embarrassing that terrestrial TV is broadcasting something which is attended by 840 people. I mean, Scottish League One, which I'm a connoisseur of, gets bigger crowds than that. And, you know,
substantially
it does
bigger,
not sound great when it's on TV, I'm going to be honest, because you can sort of hear every raucous
all
shout
the bad
from
language
from the industrial centre backs. Yeah, throw the gates up and get people in, and they'll have a great time. Surely that's the answer, Maddy.
Yes. Yeah, probably is.
You're just not a fan. You just want to kill it.
I feel like you both that there is a place for innovation, trying new things, and I appreciate that they've changed various elements of this and they've tried to develop it as they've gone along and breathed life into it. But if I'm being totally honest, Tom, I just don't think it's that good an idea.
Get rid of it.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But we do need new, interesting,
we do,
better ideas.
100%. And these ideas will come and go, and I just think there's probably a better way to try and do what they're doing.
I quite like the sort of belated swing towards regionalism that they're doing in the Racing League. You know, they've got different jockeys representing different parts of the country.
Yeah.
I think there's probably more scope for getting jockeys who actually came from those areas to represent those bits of the country, and that's how you
That would make more sense.
attract support and that kind of. I mean, like, so we've got Hayley Turner riding for Scotland this time, which I'm actually quite proud of and looking forward to. I don't know what sort of affinity she feels for the people of Glasgow, but you know, there's still time. Maybe if she wins a few races, she can celebrate coming up for a few drinks on.
Well, they might be
Sauchiehall
dancing
Street.
on the streets of Hamilton when
Most likely.
Hayley picks up a win. Well, we'll leave that topic there, and if you're thinking of having a bet on the Racing League, or even perhaps more likely the King George, do check out the next ad for our free bets page. Hello again. 4 months on from the British government publishing its white paper, which itself took 2.5 years from announcement to get to that stage, we still await news on what is actually going to change. We're waiting for the Gambling Commission to publish its consultations into a range of measures, including the controversial affordability checks. They promised these consultations would come slightly oddly before the school summer holidays, but maybe they were talking about the Southern Hemisphere because the policy consultations have not arrived. Meanwhile, in Ireland, a controversial draft gambling bill threatens to banish racing from TV screens by making it illegal to advertise betting between the very early morning and very late evening. Chris, all of this barrage of negativity towards gambling prompted you to pen a column last week, which struck a chord with our readers. Tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, I was just sort of feeling that the mood music, you know, in basically everywhere but here, is that gambling is a terrible thing and you mustn't do it. And, you know, you're forever seeing the word gambling appearing in headlines with the word toxic. And it's just a remarkable change to me from the way things used to be. So you know, when I started to bet on horses, which would be, quick calculation, adds 18 to 1973, early 90s, you know, betting was kind of a louche thing, and that was frankly part of the attraction for me. And you know, you couldn't do much with your betting shops. You had to have blacked out windows, and you sort of enter the shop, and you weren't allowed to see what was going on inside from the street in case that was attractive. And so you would go in there and you'd really think you were sort of participating in something that was a bit seedy, and that made it fun. But you know, even so, there wasn't that sort of feeling of, I don't know, moral turpitude, you know, that you didn't get that sense of condemnation, that other people wanted to save you from yourself. You know, it was something you were allowed to get on with if that's what you wanted to do. Whereas now, I really think we're on a path towards people taking the view that it's something that should be shut down for everyone's health. And I accept, of course, as we have to do, that some people have a very bad time gambling. It's like lots of other things in life. It can go wrong for you. You can get addicted, and those people need to be looked after, and we need to be making sure that betting operators live up to their responsibilities. But nevertheless, for the rest of us, it's still a perfectly valid choice for us to do with our spare funds.
You were saying this is something which gives a great deal of enjoyment to your life.
I think we have got to the stage now where we have to push that kind of argument into the public domain, just to remind people that there is actually a great deal that's positive about the betting experience. I mean, that's certainly been my life story. I've had decades of fun out of it, and it's dramatically enriched my life. And as I look back, this is going to strike some people as terribly sad, but I don't know how you would replace that amount of fun if you just suddenly lifted it out of my life. What would I have found that would have been as stimulating as backing Grand National winners or Derby winners every so often? It's been tremendous fun. And another point I was trying to get across in the column is it's not just about winning. And we're not probably going to convince many people out there by just boasting about the times when it went well. It's fun just to take part. It's an intellectual exercise. It's
also a community. I mean,
yes,
I'd
there is
say
that too.
Joining that online community is a big reason why I am such a big fan of the sport, actually. I didn't grow up around anyone who understood horse racing, which is, implicitly involved with betting, and being able to just talk to people. I get so much enjoyment if you go to Cheltenham or Ascot, whatever, and you're stood next to someone and they go, what do you think's going to win this race? And you go, well, this is my view, etc., etc. And being able to then place money behind that and figure out if you're right. I just think that social element of betting as well is great fun, and I think that's the key word you use. It enriches your experience.
And I think in a world which is very risk averse in many ways, for those of us who do like a bet, the fact that not only is it a way to take a little risk, but also that you're surrounded with other risk-taking people is part of the attraction. Because let's be honest, who would you rather have a pint with, a bookie or a priest? I don't think many people are going to say the latter, albeit some of it has been known to be a few priests at Cheltenham over the years, actually.
There's probably been some people who did both jobs at one time or another, maybe the same time.
Indeed.
On the quiet. And the competitive aspect to it is fun as well. And I think you can learn a great deal from it, from the bad experiences as well as the good. And the point I was pushing is that gambling is basically a life skill, right? Because we all go through life having to, weigh up risk and reward. So why not practice that in your spare time, and you might get better at it. There was
a very large fine or settlement rather for Betfred last week, handed out by the Gambling Commission for a host of anti-money laundering and social responsibility failings. And they gave various examples in this finding against them. Many of them absolutely right to highlight definitely problems, and I don't think anyone could object with where people have been allowed to lose large sums of money without adequate protections in place. But some of them were actually really struck me as really quite bizarre. I mean, there was one customer who placed a large number of bets and was interacted with 12 times, and Betfred, the licensee, noted that each interaction was positive and indicated the customer was happy at his level of spend. Now, apparently that was a failing. One of the concerning signs that customer showed was placing large bets. There was another professional poker player who staked over 500,000 in bets and won £8,500 net on that. And they took the view that, well, because he was winning and a professional poker player, this probably was okay. But the Gambling Commission did not, because basically, I think the idea is if you're betting, and this is definitely a trend that I think has come through very strongly in the last years, if you're betting, it's only okay to be betting to very low stakes very occasionally. And you get this from politicians, you get this from regulators, this idea, we don't want to stop people having a flutter in the Grand National. And you think, well, that's great. Well, where does that leave the rest of us who like having a flutter on a wet night at Wolverhampton on a Tuesday because it's a bit of fun? that seems to be missing from that conversation, and increasingly the view sort of taken that if you are doing that, you're sort of a danger that needs protecting from themselves.
So the number one thing is that it's really difficult for people who don't bet at all to understand betting and to say anything remotely sensible about it. So I wish they wouldn't try. And yet, we now have many legislators who seem to feel that they've got carte blanche to sort of say very censorious things about a habit that we've all enjoyed for since we were legally allowed to engage in it. Maybe it's just part of the way the world is going these days, is that we seem to be being shepherded away from anything that might be remotely risky, and we're sort of heading towards a very beige-looking future. But all the more reason why I think it's very important for those of us who do enjoy a bet and who haven't had any bad experiences to get that message out there. Tell your mates, tell people who are not engaged with it, and see if we can't, by degrees, change this mood, which is very dangerous. It strikes me at the moment. If there's a majority feeling out there that gambling is just bad and you have a rotten time doing it, eventually we'll be stopped from being allowed to do it.
Just briefly, what sort of feedback have you gotten from it? I mean, I'm sure there's so many people who follow horse racing who know exactly where you're coming from and really sympathise and empathise.
Well, so you know what it's like. You write a column and you think, this is going to get people talking, and then you're nothing for days. But it's not been like that. This has been the most sort of stimulating column in terms of responses that I've done for ages. A lot of people I've never heard from before sort of getting in touch to say, this needs to be said, and let's start this conversation. So let's do it.
Well said, Chris. We will put a link to that column in the description. Before we wrap up, we are currently running a poll to try and find out the nation's favourite racehorse, the People's Champion. Details on how to nominate your favourite will again be in the video description. But very quickly, guys, I wanted to get your personal favourite. Who would you vote for? Reminder, we're not looking for championship horses here necessarily, though it could be, but merely the horse who you think deserves to be acclaimed the People's Champion.
What a tough question. I mean, everyone's got their own personal relationships with horses, haven't they? For me, if you know me at all, you'll know that horse for me was Thistlecrack. Came along at a point in my life where I was really bitten by the racing bug. I was getting into the industry in a different way, and I just never seen a horse race the way he had, be as dominant as he was. I just thought it was thrilling, and been lucky enough to visit him at the stable a few times, which always helps make you feel like you have a bit of bond with these horses, and still receive the odd update on how he's doing now, so that's very nice.
Wonderful.
So
What is he up to?
He is with a woman, and he is doing various shows, and I often send a little messages sort of saying well done and how is he doing. Seems to be having a great time in the West Country somewhere, I believe.
Brilliant. And Chris, you actually, readers of your front runner email will already know your People's Champion, but for the benefit of the unlucky few who do not read, tell us.
Misguided. Young Hustler was the answer. I mean, probably for all of us, there's going to be a horse that we'd latched onto when we were sort of 18, 19, 20. And so that was what happened to me. He was campaigned by Nigel Twiston-Davies in the sort of way that you would never see with a jumper these days, and certainly not with a jumper of real quality, which is what he was. When he was a novice chaser, he ran like 15 times from September to April. And it didn't start off all that encouragingly, but by the end of that season, he was a proper Grade 1 horse, and then things got difficult for him because he was rated highly and he was only small and he wasn't quite up to mixing it with the very best, though he was third in the Gold Cup. I thought he was a bit unlucky in Grand Nationals. I mean, that ought to have been the race for him. When he was at the right kind of weight for winning it, he got brought down by a loose horse. But he won a Beecher Chase, and he was always in a really difficult situation, but he would always try his best. He got beaten more often than not, but never soured on the game, never got discouraged. And I think we should all try and be a bit more like Young Hustler, frankly. It would be a better world.
Love it. Mine, I'm afraid, very poor hipster racing credentials here because it's Corto Star. But Corto was again, the horse that was about when I was sort of in my sort of formative years of developing a real passion for racing. Few things really just captured my imagination with him. The time he was remounted at Exeter Just loved that. And then flashed home to come second. I just thought, okay, I like this horse a lot. The last fence errors, and in fact just the errors generally, I thought fantastic sort of character. That you could really sort of feel the personality of this horse, this maverick champion who just had a slightly lack of attention, basically, the key end, and like to keep you on your toes, and then finally just the flamboyance, the sheer athleticism.
What a redemption arc as well in the twilight of his career.
Yeah.
I know, absolutely. And he kept going. He raced a lot, didn't he? And we even had in when he was past his peak, that glorious Gold Cup with them and a long run.
Well, I always used to think that a sort of top-class staying chaser had basically 1 year at the top, and for ages that was true, sort of 80s and 90s. And yeah, I mean, he was the one that sort of really disproved that. Sort of came down, got beat by Denman, was getting beat by Long Run, and then ended up beating them both later.
That's what enamours me to horses.
Extraordinary.
The sort of human interest side of the old warrior beaten coming back. Love it.
Fantastic. Well, what is your People's Champion? Do have your say in the comments, but also please do nominate your favourite so that they can be put into our polls to discover the People's Champion. We're going to get a very long list of 80. We're going to run a whole bunch of polls on social media over the summer, and then in September, I believe, the final 5 will be written about by our top writers in the Post, and a final vote will be held to crown the People's Champion. That's it for us this week, but it's been a pleasure to have Chris and Maddy with me in the studio. My thanks to them. My thanks to you for joining us. Please don't tune in next week, unusually, because there won't be a show. It's Gloria's Goodwood and Galway week, but there will be a host of other Racing Post video content out there, as well as all the usual stuff on the website and the app, and of course the newspaper. So please do stay tuned into All Things Racing Post, and we'll see you in a fortnight's time for the Front Page. Thanks again.